The FBI and the Department of Homeland Security do a pretty good job of tracking the travel of individuals of suspicion of investigating potential acts of terror or material support to terrorism. Just this past Friday, there were arrests of 5 individuals who were providing material support allegedly to ISIL.
We are bombarded daily with those warning us of imminent danger from terrorists crossing our borders, usually with scant or sometimes missing evidence. But it brings up the issue of national security, something that in this time and age must be continually discussed, and how safe we really are with various governmental agencies involved. Our guest is the editor at BreakingDefense.com, the online defense magazine. He's a veteran covering the news and events around Congress, intelligence, and regulatory affairs, and covered national security issues for Congressional Quarterly. Colin Clark joins us today. Colin, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Ed.
Colin, let's get into this, what Jay Johnson said, first of all, where he is talking about the terrorist sleeper cells are in the United States now. And let's talk some honest evidence that we have, because we have heard this before from different lawmakers. We continue to hear from the government, from different agencies, that there is no truth to it whatsoever. There's no hard evidence of it whatsoever. Do we have hard evidence right now that in some way, shape, or form connected ISIS terrorists are infiltrating the United States from our borders?
I don't think there are very many ISIS terrorists sitting in the United States now. I think from what I've heard the last couple of weeks that there are certainly people who are trying their very best to get visas so that they can enter the United States. But that is not a simple process, and it takes time, and we certainly make mistakes from time to time and let folks in we shouldn't. But for the most part, the system works pretty well. And from what we've seen in France and Belgium the last couple of months, there is nobody in Europe, and most of these people would have to come through Europe. No government in Europe is going to give anybody an easy pass right now.
Fair to say, though, that there are people here, and certainly can happen here as well as any place else, who feel they are connected with ISIS, who feel that they may be sent by ISIS, if you will. Certainly we're talking about some of the more mentally deficient people in the world, that there are those people here who will use that as an excuse, and they will claim to be part of a concerted effort, though, correct?
Absolutely, but we've had people do that who are right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, people who hate the government, people who love the government. Most of the folks, I think, who are going to hitch their wagon to ISIS right now are, as you mentioned, not all right upstairs.
Is Jay Johnson doing this as something of a scare tactic, knowing full well that there's the possibility of the furlough of 30,000 employees coming down the pipe soon?
I've known him for quite a while. He is not a man given to overstatement. He's a very sober, very thoughtful human being. Yes, he's a bureaucrat, and yes, he's going to try to make his agency out to be as important as possible, should its funding be threatened. But I don't think Jay Johnson would overstate things. I certainly do think that there are, as the authorities have found the last couple of weeks, folks in the United States who are so deranged that they believe that somehow working with ISIS makes them better, stronger, smarter, or better in some way. God knows why.
Colin, about a minute left before we take a break. Come back and talk more here. But with regard to those 30,000 employees, there are some reports saying, wait a minute, it really wouldn't be 30,000, that they would be part-time, that they really wouldn't be out, that we wouldn't suffer any sort of a great security risk if it did happen for a couple of days. What's your take?
I don't think it would pose much of a threat. What really matters in that game is intelligence. The Homeland Security people who do intelligence, FBI, their coordination folks at the CIA, they do a pretty good job, and they would not be bumped off for a few days. And even if they were, I don't think any of those who really matter would be.
That's just it. When we're talking about these 30,000, we are not talking about, at least in your opinion and from the people that you know, we're not talking about some of the hardcore people that would be involved in stopping an attack on a dime.
I don't think so. Most of them would be Border Patrol types, folks who aren't unimportant on a daily basis when it comes to controlling and guaranteeing the border, but they're not the folks looking for high-value targets.
There you go. All right. Please stand by for a couple of moments. Second turn on national security after the break with a different spin. The defense budget, whether less is really more in this day and age, and why we need to let other people fight their own wars for a change. Plus, we'll get back to that national security issue as well, right here on MidPoint, where we question everything. Back to work on national security and the defense budget with the editor at BreakingDefense.com, Colin Clark. Hey, Colin, let me ask you about, first of all, Homeland Security before we get to some of the budget here. Because there are those people who claim that it is an unwieldy organization, that quite frankly, the FBI, the CIA, and others could do the job themselves if they were just left to their own devices, and we are wasting our time and money by having a Department of Homeland Security. What's your take and some reality here?
I certainly think DHS is a huge and unwieldy beast. It shouldn't exist as it is. But after 9/11, there was so much fear and so much hunger for some certainty that everybody said, we've got to stick this all in one place. So, we've got the Coast Guard working with TSA, working with intelligence people. And there's no common thread attaching the work of most of them other than this vague concept of Homeland Security.
Is it fair to say that because of Homeland Security and because of all these different levels here, that some things, more things are getting missed simply because there's a greater reporting need here and guys and gals are not allowed to operate as they used to?
I'm not willing to draw that conclusion, given that there have not been any significant attacks on the homeland since 9/11. No, I'm not willing to go there. I think they do their job reasonably well, but you have to remember a lot of the intelligence work that goes on is FBI overseas, it's CIA overseas, and then they work together here, coordinating the information, feeding it back and forth, and obviously working very closely with the Saudis, the Israelis, and all of our European colleagues.
Let's talk about the military budget here, because the president is asking the Congress for a defense budget of $534 billion in 2016. It's an additional $51 billion to pay for operations in Iraq and Syria. You've covered these wars for a long time here. You know some of the realities here. Is this necessary, and do we need to spend this much money in a day and age when technology is changing the way the military runs almost every day?
Well, it's changing the way it runs every day, but it's not really bringing costs down for the most part. And the main reason for that is the majority of costs in the Pentagon budget is not for weapons, it's not for technology, it's for soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and the civilians who work with them. That's over 60% of the budget, and it's been increasing at a fairly steady clip for since 9/11, because understandably we wanted to pay people well, we wanted to retain the people we had invested so much in and who are willing to give us so much.
Are we putting enough money then? We're certainly doing it in people, but are we putting enough money into the technology that's necessary, the different types of warfare that is changing today and basically making us more efficient?
Well, we're very lucky right now. We're right in between basically our Cold War weapons and the next generation of weapons like the long-range strike bomber. The F-35s is coming online. We're going to start building the Ohio replacement nuclear submarines in the next 5 years. And we're already spending billions to get the technology started for those. So we've got a slight pause, and we've been able to bring the spending on Afghanistan and Iraq down pretty substantially the last 4 years. But you are going to see a lot of pressure from Republicans this year to increase defense spending, especially for some of these weapon systems. There's a lot of support in the House, for example, for building more ships, for putting more money in for the Ohio replacement program.
Well, then let me ask you this. With about a minute to go, then, looking at all this money that we have here now, this $534 billion, but looking at what's happening around the world right now, looking at the different factions, the different terrorist groups that are out there, is that $534 billion actually enough to keep us safe?
A lot of people at the Pentagon say it's not enough because readiness, especially in the Air Force and to a lesser degree the Navy, continues to decline because we're simply using old systems much more than we expected to, and we're having to spend more and more money to keep them going and, frankly, to keep the people who fly them going.
So we still have to find a way to make it work efficiently to fight efficient wars. Best way to put it?
I wish there was such a thing as an efficient war, but there never will be.
There never will be. That's exactly the point. Colin Clark, thank you so much for sharing some expertise with us. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more in the future.
My pleasure.
All right, take care. When we talk about the American economy and what is making the nation more poor every day, let us turn for a moment to education. We're not talking about teachers. We're not talking about books. We're talking about something that most people simply don't want to discuss in public because it is worth billions of dollars, technically, to the American economy. It's not what you would think of first. We'll get to that and so much more when we continue right here on MidPoint, where we question everything.